Hey everybody, Brad again, coming at you with another 100% electric motorcycle video log, talking about interesting stuff that affects us all, at least interesting for some, I presume, hopefully most. On my way up to Monte Pizzac, meet up with a friend, do some drone video. I'm riding this crazy road full of switchbacks. Today's topic is going to be shock. I'm going to talk about it in the physical sense and the emotional sense, and apply a passage out of the book Lessons from the Hanoi Hilton to it, and maybe try to reframe the way we look at it. So, shock. I'll start out with the easy one, physical shock. If you've ever been on scene where somebody has been hurt kind of bad, or maybe you yourself have been injured, and you know about involuntary shock and you know how that feels, what it looks like. I've experienced it a handful of times myself. Playing backyard football, broke my nose pretty good twice and went into shock there. Also broke my wrist and separated my shoulder racing motorcycles, and went into physical shock there too. It's quite a weird feeling. It definitely does not feel right, and I mean, it has a purpose. Your body's trying to get you to stop doing whatever you're doing and get help. Last time I went into shock, I remember recognizing it from experiencing it before, and thanks to that I was able to keep myself calm and actually help the people who were trying to help me, because I think they were more freaked out than I was. But I had went down pretty hard on the pavement on the motorcycle, broke my wrist and separated my shoulder. My wrist my left wrist looked like it was supposed to be my right wrist. It was pretty gnarly. But you know, immediately vision started narrowing. I started sweating but shivering at the same time, and feeling really sick to my stomach and dizzy and just wanting to sit down. So that's what I did, and I got some help. A buddy of mine drove me to the ER, got taken care of and patched back up. So that's physical shock. That's a normal thing that people understand, know, and accept, right? Now what about emotional shock? Probably the most emotional shocking instance for me was when 3 of my friends were killed by a car bomb in Baghdad, Iraq in 2007. Team Lima, Tim Weiner, Dan Miller, and Elizabeth Lunke. They were out working on what they thought was a rocket launcher on a car, and it turned out to be a car bomb waiting for them to show up. So when they did, it was detonated. Tim and Dan were killed instantly. Liz survived the initial blast, but unfortunately didn't make it later on. So, not to get into the big details on that while I navigate this traffic here. Not to get into details on that, because that's not the main point of this right now. That was huge emotional trauma, you know, life-changing in an instant type stuff. And you know, emotional shock hits a little different than physical shock does. Oh boy. Nice loud exhaust on your Africa Twin. I get it. Maybe this Land Rover will let us by. Anyway, emotional shock. It can hit pretty hard, right? And sometimes it doesn't show outright. You don't see it. Like, you don't feel it the same way. You don't sweat and shiver at the same time. I mean, maybe you do. Sometimes it absolutely can physically manifest itself, but not always. Not like major physical injuries where almost every time you're going to do that. So it's important to recognize that's happening whether you realize it or not. And, you know, kind of going back to what I did back then, I guess, you know, I still do, I guess, but now I'm more in the office than I am in the field. Dealing with IEDs and all those kinds of things. Like when you get out on site, I kind of talked about this before, you have to turn your emotions off and react logically and smartly, because reacting emotionally is typically not logically and smartly. It's emotionally, with anger and sadness, those kinds of things. So the hard part comes with flipping that switch back on when you're back somewhere safe, like knowing when that is. And because of that, it's real easy to not even think about the signs of emotional shock, not realize them. And the thing about that part is they are going to rear their head at some point. And if you don't sometimes take some time to let that happen, or maybe even seek it out with, especially with people you trust and love and know really well, it's going to happen when you don't want it to, or at an inopportune time, and that can cause a lot of other, I don't want to say problems, but concerns, issues, or could lead to other things, I guess is the best way to put it. So, you know, that's kind of why it's important to normalize that and recognize those emotionally traumatic events and be okay with it. That's a normal reaction, right? Like if like you're an EMT or something and you get on the scene of a really bad car accident, you know, it ain't like the movies, right? When people are hurt bad. And if that stuff doesn't affect you and you pretend it never affects you at all, and you're seeing it day in, day out, or even just a couple times in your career, you know, that's what sociopaths are, right? And they don't have that emotion. So almost all of us have that reaction. That's a normal reaction. That's not an abnormal reaction. So, which leads me to the section from Lessons from the Way Hilton, talking about POWs in Vietnam, mostly pilots who've been shot down deep behind enemy lines, sometimes in that prison for 7 years or even more in the case of Alvarez. You know, they built up an awesome team in there, and just because they were captured, they were still fighting and still part of the mission. But you know, that's just kind of some quick background of the book. I highly recommend it. But one of the sections of that book, they talk about, you know, what if the short-term post-traumatic stress reaction was normalized? You know, what if instead of immediately trying to label people victims right away without considering anything at all, which, you know, people absolutely are victims. I'm not trying to down talk that word at all, but what if instead of calling everybody victims, you know, we tell some people, hey, you know, these things happen, but your reaction is normal. It means you're a human being. That's a good thing. And, you know, this mindset, or this state of mind of despair and sadness and lack of control is temporary. You know, when you're ready, look for ways to figure out what these things taught you, and remember that whatever else happens in life, you've got this experience to call upon to remember. You know, for me, not to sidetrack too much here, but I absolutely called upon losing Tim, Dan, and Liz when my dad died earlier this year. You know, it was easy for me to recognize the stages of grief and when they're coming, and not just recognize them, but accept them and let them happen, and not fight it, and not try to hide it, and not try to pretend everything is okay, because it's not, right? That's normal human reaction. So, yeah, in summary, kind of hit on the topics of physical and emotional shock, and how if we could normalize the emotional one, you know, maybe we can help people realize that that's part of being human, that's part of the human experience, and it's okay, and you shouldn't try to hide it or cover it with doing things to take your mind off of it. You know, you should allow yourself to feel all those emotions, and you'll probably, I would say likely, live a bit better life doing that. So if you have any agreements, disagreements, as always, feel free to start a conversation in the comments. And of course, if you didn't put me on mute and just watch the scenery, and if you did, well, you didn't hear anything I said, and that's okay, because this is pretty awesome scenery, right? Well, until next time.